So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our panelists. First is Dr. Rumi Price. She is a professor of psychiatry in the Washington University School of Medicine with research expertise in trauma spectrum syndrome, including trauma experiences, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, and suicidality. She has over 25 years of experience conducting research with continuous federal research funding as the PI. Dr. Price has held leadership positions over the last several years and most recently founded the Human Trafficking Collaborative Network with 3 co-founders. She currently focuses on epidemiological work for traumatized populations, including victims and survivors of human trafficking, and a systematic prevalence estimation and case definition of trafficking in persons in South Africa. She obtained her PhD from the University of California at Berkeley. Welcome, Dr. Price.
Hey, can you hear me okay? So,
Yes.
hi everyone. I wanted to thank the organizers first. This is an extremely interesting opportunity for me. So, Aiden, and Sammy, and David, Annie, and whoever I forgot, thank you so much. For this panel discussion, the most important information about me is that I have founded the Human Trafficking Collaborative Network, HTCN, in 2015, which is sponsored by the Washington University's Institute for Public Health. Our mission continues to be increasing research, dissemination, and education in the St. Louis region. We wanted to become a small think tank type of a group and eventually to build a small foundation dedicated to human trafficking and similar problems, which are kind of gross violation of human rights and in some cases violent victimization of people. Throughout this panel, my comments today will focus on 2 areas. First is disentangle misinformation, disinformation, and a myth, if you will, about human trafficking locally and nationally and globally. You have witnessed firsthand how toxic such information become in the past 4 years in the United States politics. The same is true for human trafficking. And the second, I hope to disseminate and answer your questions related to global forced labor because empirical knowledge is even less known to the general public in the US. Furthermore, anyone can contribute collectively to reduce further incidences of global forced labor. For those of you who are interested in sustainable global development, I just wanted to read the 10 ways in which global trafficking in person matter from the United Nations recent publications. Human trafficking in persons reduces productivity, it creates intergenerational poverty, trafficking in person institutionalized inequalities, it weakens multiplier effect, it discourages innovation and production, it produces capital market failure, it hits the public purse, it weakens governance, it fuels corruption and illicit financial flows, and finally, it harms the environment. So that's enough of my introduction. So Sami, go ahead with introducing other esteemed experts in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Price. So our audience, feel free to direct any questions regarding anything that Dr. Price said to her directly in the chat or through the Q&A function. Next, we have Ms. Jessica Wilkins. Jessica Wilkins currently serves as the Administrator of Community-Based Services at the Covering House. The mission at TCH is to provide refugee and restoration using the least restrictive environment for sexually exploited and trafficked children and teens. That's refuge and restoration. She is tasked with building, implementing, and overseeing programs to raise awareness of commercial sexual exploitation of children and reducing the risk of kids falling into trafficking through community engagement. She has provided education and general knowledge of commercial sexual exploitation to students, parents, and staff all over Missouri and even Pensacola, Florida. Welcome, Ms. Wilkins.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us and giving us your evening, especially on this chilly night. I am really excited about this opportunity to speak with you all because I really enjoy the education aspect of what it is that I do. Just really having conversation to make sure that everybody, like Dr. Price said, is getting adequate information and things like that. Again, at the Covering House, we provide therapeutic restorative services for child and minor victims of trafficking. So we've been asked to consult on kiddos as young as 7 and had clients all the way up until I believe like age 24. I actually have both my undergraduate degree and my graduate degree in social work from SLU. But I have really enjoyed my time at the Covering House. I've been there since 2015. I started out as a direct care staff, a youth development specialist with the kiddos that are in our residential program, and shifted to a more administrative role in the fall of 2017, where I took on the community education program and overseeing that, to now have re- late last year, been promoted to administrative community-based services. And so that includes not only the community engagement and presentations and education that I was doing, but now also includes the therapeutic services and preventative services as well. So again, at the Covering House, we work with youth that have experienced some kind of sexual trafficking and or exploitation.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Ms. Wilkins. Next, we have Ms. Patricia McKnight. Trish McKnight is an advocate, peer resource speaker, and author who serves as a key voice, updating the statute of limitations in Illinois, helping create standards of care, training law enforcement, healthcare educators, and community members to recognize, report, and respond with trauma-informed knowledge. She founded the Butterfly Dreams Alliance, NFP, a community outreach charitable organization providing awareness, education, and assistance for those affected by abuse, violence, sexual harm, and human trafficking. Trish is also a regional ambassador of NAASCA, a member of Central Illinois Human Trafficking Task Force, End Demand Illinois, and collaborates with resources throughout the state to better assist others to safety, recovery, and rebuilding. Welcome, Ms. McKnight.
Hi, thank you. I'm so honored to be here with everyone. My expertise comes from a much different background than your other panelists. While I do have the last 6 years in attending trainings to get my certifications in this area of abuse and violence and human trafficking prevention, I also come from a survivor place, so it very much reaches into an umbrella effect of going from child abuse and possibly leading into human trafficking, and this is common in rural areas. Butterfly Dreams Alliance focuses more on connecting through outreach, assistance, and education in the rural communities and the barriers that we face, the lack of resources. So we try to provide those in these areas with that first step person contact, and then help them find safety through the available resources closest to them. As far as the NASCA Regional Ambassador, that is the National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, and I am the Midwest Regional Ambassador. So I also work with adult survivors in that background. We're here to try and provide a guide that we can get that beginning change that we all need, as we all deeply desire for that equality and safety in our society. We have to be able to realize how much of the adversities and trauma effects continue and lead us into those more risk behaviors of trafficking or falling prey to a trafficker. So educating our teens to make them smarter than the predators and empowering others' voices to come forward and know that help is available.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And finally, we have Ms. Sarah Pretorius. Sarah Pretorius is the Director of Programming and Partnerships of the Sail Away Foundation, Sail of Freedom. Working as a community health advisor in Malawi, she experienced firsthand the importance of prevention and education as a means to combat human trafficking. As Sail of Freedom's advocacy and philanthropy coordinator, Sarah works to bring to light the issue of sex trafficking across every sector of society. Sarah speaks to local groups, engages with donors, community, and corporate partners, and actively promotes the Sail Away Foundation's mission over social media and online marketing platforms. She also provides assistance to leadership in her role as executive lead to the CEO, supporting the organization as it expands its services to survivors across the nation. Welcome, Sarah, tonight.
Hello, good evening, everyone. It is my great honor and pleasure to be here with my esteemed co-panelists, and thank you to the team at WashU for putting this together. As you were going through my bio, I was like, gosh, I am all over the place, and that is a fact, because with my two positions, I work between two organizations, Sail of Freedom and the Sail Away Foundation, and so as many of us in the nonprofit world know, we wear many hats. And so what I look forward to, yep, Jessica's like, yep, we know. What I look forward to speaking to tonight and sharing with you all is more about Sail of Freedom, which was started back in 2010. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary. We have our presence in both Florida and the Midwest in the greater Chicago land area. And under Sail of Freedom, we have our two-house residential model where we serve survivors 18 plus of sex trafficking. We also have our prevention education program where we are in schools. Florida was one of the first states in the country to mandate human trafficking prevention curriculum. So we are endorsed by the Department of Education as an approved program. We also have our outreach team, which I call the rock stars, because they are on the front lines, as I'm sure many of you are well aware. They're on the streets, in the jails, working with our judicial system. We developed the Turn Your Life Around prostitution court diversion program, one of the first in the nation, where we work hand in hand with both law enforcement and our judicial partners, so that instead of arresting and rearresting the same young women and putting them in jail where they do not belong, we are helping them walk into freedom, and making sure that once they complete our program, that all of their prostitution related charges are completely expunged from their program, because, you know, 3 of those, and that's a felony. So we've served survivors who are 19 years old and who have 20 felonies. So as laws on the federal level are being changed, we recognize the huge importance to make sure that our amazing law enforcement officers are on the ground are recognizing that there is no such thing as a child prostitute. So we're helping these young women who might have been on the street since they were, 12, 13 years old, or bouncing around foster care and have been rearrested time and time again, and get those felonies expunged so that they're able to get meaningful careers, go back to school, and it completely transforms their lives. And then with the foundation, we always knew that from Sail of Freedom, we wanted to take the best practices and answer the question to the best of our ability: how do we end trafficking in a generation in our country? And so in order to answer that question, we looked at not only the best practices from Sail of Freedom in terms of working with law enforcement and creating those systems of collaboration, but realizing that we can't do this in a silo. So we work with partners around the country who are doing the work, and helping support and fund that work, because we know that many of this comes down to philanthropic efforts, and so funding is crucial. We rely on collaboration, innovation, and the ability to scale. So I look forward to sharing more about how we're doing that across the country. And we have great partners in the St. Louis area and in law enforcement there that we're very grateful for.
Great, thank you so much to everyone. As our audience can hopefully see, we have a wide range of backgrounds and expertise with us tonight. So we encourage you all to keep those in mind when you direct questions in the chat specifically, as we move throughout the discussion. So to start off, we do recognize that our participants are approaching the subject matter with various levels of education and awareness of human trafficking and how it's defined in various sectors and operationally around the country. So Dr. Price, how is human trafficking defined in the US today? And sort of what are the differences between a more political or legislative definitions and a more social or public health interpretation?
So I get to do a boring part of this session, I think. So in terms of a definition, so there is something called Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. It's been 20 years, but that defines the scope of human trafficking in the United States. And there are two parts. And I put some slides in the chat, so you may be able to connect to that if you're more used to sort of looking at the slides. But anyway, sex trafficking is a commercial sex act, which is induced by force, fraud, and coercion. And this or is very important, the person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age. So accordingly, as Sarah mentioned, there is no child prostitution because they cannot consent to have a sex while they are minor. So how could they consent to have commercial sex? That's the underlying logic for that. Another component is labor trafficking, and this is defined as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor of services through the use of force, fraud, and coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, and slavery. It's mouthful, but the main thing across those two types of traffickings in the US and elsewhere is force, fraud, coercion, except that for minors, for sex trafficking, that does not apply. Yeah, so that's how it's defined. And the providers use action means purpose model, but I'm just going to skip that. And I wanted to explain my way of understanding. So when I first looked at this legal definition, I wasn't quite convinced that this approach, legal and political approach, provide the most sound public health approach. So the way I think about it, it's like any hidden population, and HIV/AIDS victims and survivors used to be in that kind, although we know a lot more about it. Or IV drug users, they are used to be hidden. So I see a human trafficking victimization in that regard. So here's on top is a tiny portion of a people that you see in the Department of Justice press release, news, and we know about them. We don't know the names of victims, but we know traffickers. Those are really the tip of the iceberg. And below that, I mean, I don't say below that, but in terms of looking at the public health approach as a triangle, below that are the people that we see. And ED doctors and perhaps social service providers see them at first hand because they need to be cared, they need food, they have injuries that need to be treated. So they are the second layer where we know the faces, we know the people, we know the names, but we may not be able to identify. And if you train, say, healthcare providers, they'll be able to identify them better. The farther down in the triangle is where we are trying to figure out as researchers, how many more people we just don't know. They exist, but we just have no way of knowing them. So that's one concept of a public health that I use. The second idea is, well, in the criminal justice system, you either committed a crime or you didn't commit a crime. So you have to say, yes, you done the crime or you didn't do the crime. But when you look at the labor and the sex trafficking, and also, the ages of the victims, so on and so forth, I think it's more reasonable to think of human trafficking in terms of more like, what we call the dimensional approach. So there are more people, there are people who are more severely impacted, victimized. And there are people at the other end, they don't even know they have done something like that. If you think of high school students who exchange marijuana for sex, and there is about 1.7% in Minnesota study who do that during the high school. Now, they don't have the concept that they've been victimized. And so that's kind of lowering the dimension. But if they're minor, they've been trafficked. Okay, so if you think about the age, for example, why age 18? What happens in age 18? You're allowed to drive in the age 16, right? But you're not allowed to drink until age 21 in the United States. So what about so special about age 18? That's a legal restriction. So if you're 17 and you're considered being trafficked as a child, once you reach the age 18, you've done the prostitution. That doesn't make sense to me. So again, think about the age as a dimensional, continuous scale. So the dimensional approach is what we've been using, and that seems to be better in understand in both intricacy and systematic understanding of the prevalence of human trafficking. Okay, so I think that's enough for you. Okay.
Yes, and Dr. Price did also touch on the response to the poll that we sent out, which was how many people are trafficked in the United States annually. And unfortunately, no one really knows, as Dr. Price reiterated, due to classifications of age barriers, sort of underreporting, and all those contributions that make that number not exactly quantifiable, which of course advocacy work aims to mitigate as well. So in that same vein, Ms. Wilkins, we'd love for you to speak on sort of the different sectors that human trafficking is most prevalent in, specifically throughout the United States, and how this specifically sort of makes it harder to identify or address, as Dr. Price was explaining before.
All right. Well, thank you for that information. I'm sorry if it looked like I was writing notes, because I like to make sure I'm up to date on everything that I inform others of. So thanks for that, Dr. Price. So just some information. Polaris Project, they keep amazing statistics. And so I utilize them quite a bit. So according to their 2019 report, there has been a 19% uptake in the amount of calls that they are receiving from 2015 to 2019. So that was a huge jump from about 1,600 to now we're up to about 4,300 some individual survivors that have been contacting them. They are being forced to do things like, for sex trafficking specifically, escorting services, illicit massages, and pornography, while labor trafficking victims are typically forced to do domestic type work, agriculture or animal industry type work, or traveling sales crew. There are some that experience both sex and labor trafficking, and those top identified types are the illicit massage, illicit activities, and bar, strip clubs, cantinas, kind of things. And again, these are all for the U.S. What I have seen in some of the research that I've done is that something that a lot of people always want to know, and I think this is unfortunately the reason I even have a job, is when it comes to age. On average, for both sex and labor trafficking victims, they are typically, when they reach the hotline, they are between the ages of 12 and 20. So that falls right into the age bracket that we at the Covering House serve. We have had kiddos come to us with all kinds of ways that they got involved in trafficking, whether that be a family member, a neighbor, a romantic partner. We've had some of them exploit themselves. They are looking to have a specific thing, and someone or themselves does whatever they can to make sure that they get it. I was trying to think of another breakdown. Something I wanted to mention. Sorry, something I wanted to mention. Because I've heard it already. Women and girls have been referred to a lot. I just want to dispel that this does not happen to men and boys. I tend to try to make sure that that is known. I may say girls because we work with more females. However, we have been in contact with boy and men victims of trafficking as well. So I just want everybody to keep that in mind also.
Thank you. And sort of in the similar realm, we have a participant question for Ms. McKnight. Your work in Illinois as well, they're wondering sort of about these differences in definition or interpretation of human trafficking across state lines, and if there are any differences between states in how it is defined at the legal or, again, public health level, and sort of what your observation has been in that regard. Oh, you're muted.
My apologies. As far as the differences across state lines or throughout the region, the difference in Missouri, Dr. Price had noted that, you know, kids in under Missouri law are still being held and having to deal with charges of being prostitutes rather than being victims. In Illinois, they did despair that. They did change that. So anyone under the age of 18 is immediately considered a victim. They are law enforcement, are service providers, healthcare providers. I know that this is happening throughout the bi-state area, throughout both states. More and more into the trauma-informed approach. And what we do with Butterfly Dreams Alliance and trying to reach out further is also informing their, as I said in the beginning in the introduction for Butterfly Dreams Alliance, we do a lot within the rural communities. All of our areas are smaller communities. We don't have the typical gangs, pimps type of activity. So it is more hidden. And even with labor trafficking, we get a lot of migrant workers this way, but they very much keep them themselves or on the farm property. So I think within our area, I believe that we have come a large way, a huge way in being able to change how we respond and engage law enforcement as well as healthcare to act on that. The barriers, again, for rural communities is that they don't have that same access and quick response to the same number of types of resources available. We, in getting our teens educated, this is a huge factor because February Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. When we all think back to when we were teenagers, and now that we are looking at the human trafficking aspect, I just want to make a quick note. Those words, if you love me, you will. They are very powerful. The pandemic has made this a 10-fold times problem. We've already had 159 reports of child trafficking victims and just for 2021 in Illinois. So that is just beginning. We're only in February. We had 259 reported in 2020. So as we move forward, we're only seeing the beginning layers of this as our service providers are stepping in, whether people are reaching out for intimate partner violence or mental health, substance abuse. Once they start getting into treatment and start talking with people, then there's those layers of trauma that follow, and we begin to connect the dots to see there have been aspects of trafficking along the way. And like Jessica and Dr. Price both clarified, before, they don't even realize that it's happened to them. The more education, the more outreach, and the more information that we can provide for them in a uniform manner changes that outlook, especially for our teens, because we can take a trauma teen and turn their lives around before they get into their adult relationships and begin that repetitive cycle. So I think that the differences are largely between the urban and the rural communities. We don't see the same type of trafficking as what's seen in the more populated areas.
Sure, sure. And it's very interesting to sort of expand on what you said as well, as how the differences aren't just sort of operationally, but also in terms of levels of awareness or education as well. And I'd like to pose a similar question to Ms. Pretorius as well, with your work more nationwide, sort of to additionally comment on these differences that you've observed and how they tend to either align or expose either existing disparities or complement similar sort of activities regionally that you've observed in your work.
Yes, absolutely. So because the organizations I work for, we focus mostly in the Southeast and the Midwest, again, greater Chicago area. And those two regions are pretty vastly different from one another. So what we see, speaking from the Southeast and more specifically Florida and Florida's Gulf Coast, even the Super Bowl that just happened in Tampa. I'm based in Kansas City, so everyone was dead silent on my side, but all my friends down in Florida were excited. But what we saw from the Super Bowl over the weekend is highly telling of what we see normally. Our outreach team, who was on the streets and working with law enforcement and helping them extrapolate survivors from their situations, they said that like 95% of the victims that they rescued over the course of the past week were brought in from out of state. So in Florida and places like, the West Coast and big cities that are hubs in and of themselves, people want to go there, not just because there are, there's more to do, there's other attractive features, but because there is money there, because people go there on holiday. And so what we see, especially on the Gulf Coast of Florida, a lot of traffickers take advantage of the beautiful beaches. It's a holiday destination. There's tons of conferences and resorts. And so it's a great, unfortunately, place to lure young men and women to. Runaway kids are more likely to run down to Florida than, I'll just throw it out there, nothing against Ohio, but destinations like Florida are very attractive. So we see a lot of younger runaways who think, oh, it's warmer there, I can make it on the streets, there's lots of opportunity for me. So in terms of the differences that we see operationally with human trafficking, sex trafficking, is, with these resort towns and coastal areas, just the number of people coming there to either try and make it on their own, who then become vulnerable to traffickers, or traffickers knowing that in states like Florida or the Milwaukee corridor, where the interstate transportation is huge, unfortunately, it's easy for traffickers to bring their victims from city to city. We've had survivors who said, I would wake up one day in Miami and then have a date in Orlando and then be brought up to Tallahassee and then be brought down to Tampa. And so what we see really between the regions that we serve is just the kinds of how traffickers are getting a hold of their victims, and then what happens to those victims once they do.
And this is, again, an additional layer to this question that a participant is asking about. I think Ms. McKnight and Ms. Wilkins both brought this up in different regards, but the effect of the pandemic on human trafficking and sort of what has either been further exploited as a result of this or not. Ms. Wilkins or Dr. Price or Ms. McKnight, if you would like to comment on that for this panel, for this participant. I don't think they directed it to a specific panelist.
I can speak for us as an agency. It has definitely, unfortunately, had a toll on some of the kiddos that we have worked with. We were able to actually reconnect with some clients that we weren't in consistent contact with, due to whatever reason, but they got to a point during this pandemic where they're like, I literally have no idea what else to do or where else to turn or who I can get help from. And I am doing everything I possibly can to not go back to something that I didn't want to necessarily do in the first place. I can speak to that. I know at least we probably had at least 3 or 4 kids and that came back while also having to try and figure out how we can be of financial assistance to those that we were currently serving who ended up losing their jobs to the pandemic, while also trying to financially be of assistance to those that were coming back. It was just one of those things that we kind of just had to roll with the punches. We started doing a lot of research about grants and things like that that might be available to be of assistance to us so we can be of assistance to them. It's one of those things where people have gotten desperate and they know that no matter what's going on in the world, this is going to always be there for them to go back to, which is in the conversation that I've had with some of our clients.
Mhm. So it's actually bridged those conversational or communication gaps for that you've observed.
Definitely.
Okay. Ms. McKnight, yeah.
Yes, if I may. Um, Talking about the pandemic and the layers of that, when you look at how badly the economic impact has hurt our entire society, on a global scale, not just on a national scale, on a global scale. Just taking for one example, I believe it was in November, the Texas Department of Family Protective Services provided a new research from their child sex trafficking task force. And in it, what they found was that 65% of the cases that were reported were actually mothers who were the traffickers, who were trafficking children. And the top reason for that exploitation and trafficking was for payment of or to purchase drugs. So when you add addictions with an economic downturn and they no longer can afford that addiction, so it puts not only them at risk of falling prey to a trafficker, but if they have kids in the home, those kids are at risk too. And they've been as young as 18 months to 2 years old. These kids can't speak for themselves. They cannot reach out. They don't know to go online. They don't have that access yet. Families are not seeing them. Everybody is talking through Zoom. It's very important that as our kids get back into school in different areas across the country, teachers are crucial. They are those second set of eyes that see kids coming and going, and they can pick up on those challenges and behavioral problems and maybe anger issues or concentration problems that kids are having, so that they can start discussing, is there a problem we can help with? Because in the reality of it, if it is indeed family facilitated or anything really that's involving child trafficking, or any kind of trafficking, the last thing that trafficker wants is to get exposed, because if they get exposed, they get busted, and then the money is then gone. Their money pile dries up. Everything is frozen. Their clients are assisted and put in services to assist and recover. And at the same time, then they need to protect that secrecy, that violence is even more important, as isolation has given them even more control. And the lack of interactions with actual visual interactions has put even that many more at risk. And drug addictions, alcohol addictions, those have a supply and demand just as much as trafficking, and whether it be for whatever services that they can exploit someone for. So that pandemic really puts a toll on it on that level.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think across so many of the discussions we as an organization have put on as well, the list of the effects of this pandemic on, not just the obvious, financial or isolation-based issues, but everything to do with education and the stability of information sources, as you mentioned, is so critical across so many of these topics as well. There was another question in the chat for Dr. Price and Ms. Pretorius as well about sort of the most common misconceptions about human trafficking, either in its operation or with survivorship, because your work across both of you focuses on this community outreach as well. Can you speak to sort of the most common misconceptions about the subject? Our participants were wondering about that.
Dr. Price, would you like to go first?
There are a number of issues, but I have communicated with the organizers of this group as well. So, that there is a natural tendency for advocacy groups to sensationalize how bad sex trafficking is. And that is misperception. It's not bad, but the visualize it with some sort of physical strains, and that doesn't happen all the time. It does happen, and people have kind of like a sexualized idea of sex trafficking. Of course, it involves sex, but it's not really like that. It's more of exploiting those people who are already vulnerable with the best means. In other words, for girls and women, it's a sex, and it doesn't decrease the values if you use it. So as a labor. So I think we need to think about the impact of imaging and not to use sensationalized images and sensationalized languages to promote sex trafficking and the wider human trafficking. So that, to me, is a misperception, and also disinformation to some extent, but also it hurts the field because people who don't know what trafficking is like is, oh my gosh, and it's the bottom of the bottom people. No, it's not that. So that's my point for today.
And off of Dr. Price's point, and Dr. Price, I love what you said, it's exploiting those who are already vulnerable. Those of us who work within this space, we all understand that at the root of sex trafficking in America, and which makes it very different from countries such as South Africa or Brazil or Thailand, where many times abroad, the root of sex trafficking is poverty, right? And just like the lack of other income streams and job opportunities. But within America, the root is childhood sexual abuse. 100% of the survivors that Selah Freedom has served over the decade that we've been of service have experienced childhood sexual abuse. And so from there, that cycle of abuse and what that's, that path that abuse sets that child down on is something that they never would have chosen for themselves, which leads me to one of the biggest points that I hope that we can continue to debunk is that many times survivors don't self-identify right away. And they even if we've had women who've come into our programming and even hearing the words that like, I'm a survivor, like a survivor of what? Like, I used to do that. He used to make me do that. That was just the way it was, or that was the life. And, when that is all it's hard to kind of then understand, that that's not normal, it's not okay. And so just that process of healing and having that victim informed, trauma clearing and processing through that trauma is a huge undertaking on the part of the survivor. And when they're able to get out on the other side and self-identify, these are women who come from all kinds of backgrounds. It doesn't just happen to a certain stereotype. It affects men and women, boys and girls from every socioeconomic, race, religious background, so that the idea that those who are vulnerable to being exploited and trafficked look a certain way or are from a certain part of town or a certain background is just not what we see.
Absolutely. And there's an interesting discussion happening in the chat right now. I'm hoping some of you might be inclined to comment on the role of social media. Perhaps right now, before we transition into sort of the initiatives that we're hoping to involve our audience in as well, a participant is wondering what are the ways that social media has either been exacerbating instances of human trafficking or what that role looks like specifically. Perhaps Ms. Wilkins, if you'd like to start.
I think what we have noticed, especially with this pandemic and everything moving to virtual, whether it be gaming, school, social media, it's making people have to connect virtually, and so they are using this avenue. People that normally wouldn't be using social media, that wouldn't normally be doing things virtually, are there, and so that brings a whole new pool of people to kind of target for traffickers, unfortunately, because they're still not really familiar with maybe how it works and things like that, which makes them even more vulnerable when someone is looking to prey on them. Everybody's screen time has increased, including kiddos. Again, and the moment it seems like every time we get an understanding that they're using some technology and understanding the unintended consequences of said technology, there's some new technology that comes out and we're light years behind catching up with that and figuring out that they're using that form of technology to manipulate people and things like that. So it's unfortunately, I'm going to assume that there's been an uptick in trafficking and exploitation done virtually, just because now it's kind of unavoidable and everybody is there, including people that aren't great at navigating it and that wouldn't normally navigate it.
Mm-hmm. Ms. McKnight, did you have something to add to that as well?
Only that, every year the FBI puts out the most dangerous apps. Usually it's a list of 10 or 15. You can find it on FBI.gov. Last year they included Snapchat and WhatsApp and, all of those other apps. The thing that I think is important for everyone to realize is that it doesn't matter if you are on a gaming system or if you are on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. If you are doing any kind of social interaction via the internet, and you are putting out there, sad today, depressed today, especially for kids in isolation or anyone in this isolation and feeling that much lonelier and that much more disconnected. If I always tell people, for every one that gets online, probably for every 10 to 20 people that jump online, there is probably at least one predator in some form or another that is out there, regardless of what game or what app it is. They are looking 24/7 for someone that they can lure in easily. And right now is the time, just as Ms. Wilkins had said, this is a time when everyone is connecting virtually and kids are spending so much time in games. So really knowing who your kids are talking to online and who you're talking to online, being careful not to share personal information where you're at, knowing that, turn the location off of your phone so that people can't track you where you're at, or that it doesn't pop up on somebody's phone, so and so is nearby. You know, it could be someone, maybe it is just a friend to meet up, but unfortunately we see also those cases where it is not that, and it ends up being the worst case scenario.
Mhm. Yes. I think similarly to the discussion of social media and internet access, as a follow-up to Dr. Price's discussion of imagery and sort of the glorification of certain imagery associated with human trafficking, there's a question wondering about how one can sort of avoid falling into these sensationalized images or perception of this topic, and what sources or sources to avoid might be more comprehensive in learning more about this topic without sort of contributing to that glorification for Dr. Price.
So there are resources of how to make a photography of victims without sensationalizing, how to capture trafficking without actually showing it is actually a trafficking. So I don't have the actual links, but I'll make sure to pass to Sammy or David afterwards. Okay. Yeah, so it's been, yeah, it's been studied and it's been disseminated, but most folks don't go to those specialized links. So I think, you know, once you learn, you understand, more subtle images are more useful for anti-trafficking. So Jessica, you wanted to say something.
I think you're still muted.
I figured that was going to happen sometimes. But I just really wanted to mention how, again, with social media and all of these like challenges that are going around, and how sexualized they are, and how they are continuing to have young people become comfortable with sexualizing themselves, and putting that information out there. So in turn, somebody's going to look at that and be like, okay, I might have a way in. Oh, your video was cute, or I saw this and I saw that you posted that, and use that to their advantage. That'll be their way in. And that could potentially be, especially with that silhouette challenge. To my understanding, if people aren't wearing clothing, there's some way to take that red filter off, and you could see that what they have on, or if they don't have anything on at all. And that could, open up a whole can of worms to be sextortion kind of situation, where now I have these nude videos and photos of you, and so you're going to continue to do whatever I ask you to do, because if not, everybody's going to see this naked stuff of you. So with every new challenge, especially the ones that are based in sexuality, that would be one of the ways to really start to desensationalize all of this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think as the chat persists, a lot of the questions are redirecting to sort of what can we do? Where are the areas that we as participants, we as students can get involved? So starting with Ms. Pretorius, what have you noticed to be sort of the most effective involvements that students can have, particularly our college age students, or what are the more general ways that our participants can either get involved or support you all in your individual initiatives as well?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest ways in which college students can get involved with, and there's so many amazing organizations. So finding an organization that is either locally, if you want to get involved as a volunteer, or support them, on a national level if they're having programs in your area. But really, at the college level, it's advocacy and debunking those myths. And one thing that my colleague and I are working on is creating a college chapter that helps. I'm going to direct this mostly towards females, as we see this happening more with female college students, but the phenomenon of being a sugar baby, and that's being glamorized, and it's being downplayed and sugar-coated, whitewashed, to make it a very fun, innocent, lucrative and vanilla, like, oh, this is okay to do. It's being endorsed left, right, and center by so many big companies who are taking advantage of the fact that there are young women who might be in different, struggling with different economic issues and, not having the ability to even maybe get loans or traditional financial aid, or even having that, but wanting that extra source of income to buy the nice purses to kind of keep up with the times with what they're seeing with styles and trends on campus. So I can put a link to that. We're looking for college chapters to have representatives across the country. We're starting mainly in the Florida region area, as that's where Sail of Freedom is based out of. But if there's any students who are interested in learning more to hear about how they can bring this, and it's called #NotOneMore, college chapters, because we don't want one more college student to be exploited through sextortion or to be taken advantage of. Because the reality is, even if a young woman is feeling that this is an empowering thing to do, 9 times out of 10, there's still that she's feeling like she needs to do it for that economic benefit. And that if money was not a factor, would she be going on these dates and subjecting herself to potentially being raped or sexually abused at the hands of these strangers?
Absolutely. I think something so pertinent as well, that is so effective, that requires, just simply more education, as you were saying, is the language used to discuss this topic and how to avoid that romanticism of things that might have been more normalized. So the language associated with this discussion and sort of even, interfering or correcting, intercepting is maybe the more right word, when you hear these conversations taking place that perpetuate these negative impacts as well. Ms. Wilkins, sort of the initiatives either St. Louis based or that you perceive to be the most effective as well, people are interested.
I think one of the biggest things to do is to just start with your friend group. Start doing your own research. Start calling out those jokes that are rude and insensitive. Do the research yourself. We got to really look at demand reduction, especially at the collegiate level. The biggest thing would probably be taking a look at your own sexual habits, including, partaking in pornography, attending strip clubs and things like that, as well as just objectifying people in general. If they would like to help with the Covering House specifically, we are always looking for youth development specialists. As long as you are 21, we work with both men and women, which I think a lot of people think is awkward. However, we know that we can't keep these girls sheltered from men their entire life. So why not give them the opportunity for them to experience a healthy male in, a supported environment, so they can learn those skills there, get the support, and take that on with them later when, because we want to do a lifestyle change, not a behavior change. We want them to be able to take what it is that they get from us to all aspects of their lives. We will also be accepting interns starting in the fall. So both social work and counseling students. It may take me a little longer on the counseling students since I'm a social worker by nature, but I will be working those things out, as well as we're looking to do something that we want to call Youth Empowerment Council, where at different schools, we are giving individuals or groups toolkits to say, we're going to do this kind of educational awareness event on campus, and or this fundraiser, and potentially be of a support to them. We would like to do that all over the St. Louis area for middle schools, high schools, and colleges. So we're also open to anybody else's ideas, things that we just may not be aware of. I think I finally realized that I'm not as hip as I thought I was. And so I'm hoping some college students and some high school students could potentially help us come up with new ways of really getting the word out there. But if you're interested in just getting some scripts on things that you can say when things come up, just let me know. And I will do my best to make sure that I get something to you.
Mhm. Absolutely, yeah, and this is just a disclaimer as we're receiving all this incredible guidance and advice from our panelists. We are having our follow-up discussion on Wednesday to sort of have this material all, in a digestible format for all of our participants to continue to take action on as well. But Ms. McKnight, at the policy level, there's a couple questions in the Q&A box in the chat about the decriminalization of sex work, of drugs, and how at the policy level, from your experience, there might be efforts to sort of have these types of legislative advances be effective in the realm of human trafficking.
I know that going through when we fought, my experience with policy and updating statute of limitations in Illinois for involuntary servitude, sexual servitude of minor trafficking in persons. Previously, it was 1 year after your 18th birthday. We now have a minimum of 25 years. So that's a long time. The focus through the task force operations and through the 50 plus service providers that sit on this task force and try to develop both in education and law enforcement and policy and healthcare and even in our schools is to, mental health care is absolutely important. It's something that needs to be a priority. We are trying to change. If you really think about our human history, 2,000 plus years, we have this learned tolerance and acceptance of exploiting and or harming or mistreating those, luring those, taking advantage of vulnerable people. Many times when we get into adulthood, we have no idea what healthy looks like or what we're supposed to do. So mental health care services, definitely substance use services. There are a lot of peer specialist recoveries services that are developing, not specifically just for trafficking victims, but it is a piece of the puzzle. Victims, survivors, and I do want to call them survivors because that's what they are. Once we are able to take and help them get to a safe place where they can lay their head down at night and not have to fear that they've got to go out and do something that they really do not want to do. They can focus on just getting some rest. They then can get treatment for substance use and mental health care and overall health care, injuries, lasting injuries. I know as a survivor myself, I was trafficked in a small southern Illinois town just south of St. Louis area. And, there was a lot involved. It was very public. It was at the public bars. It was in my home. I attended the same school system for 6 consecutive years. There was a lot of neglect. There was a lot of missed homework and failing grades, all of these red flags going up. Everyone knew my family. They knew about what was happening. So as I got to be an adult and become an advocate, it was, okay, how can we change this? And what is it that I would have wanted? So as I sit on the task force, I try to share that voice with them as, this is what I think would have helped me back then, because I didn't get away from that kind of life, suffering substance abuse and mental health and attempted suicide, repeated violent failed relationships until I was 40 years old. My children struggled through it, and it is just that norm that our society has said, oh, well, this is how life goes. No, it's not. Talking about media and how we share it, it's not the hand over the mouth taking the little white girl away, or anything. No, it could be your neighbor, it could be the house up the street, it could be somebody in your apartment building. The reality of the numbers are far too close. There are so many problems. The underlying layers under the umbrella of human trafficking is the aspect of violence that controls that. So that could be intimate partner violence. Then as that adapts and survivors grow up and they try to figure out what happened, you had mentioned earlier about how people don't even realize that they've been trafficked. That's so very true. I had published my book in 2011. I was like 45 years old. And it wasn't until 2 years later that I went back to read my own book. And I got to that point because I had attended some trainings on human trafficking that finally I went into my therapist and had a complete meltdown because, oh my God, that's what it was. I could never put a name to it. And I don't think that not everyone can when they're in the middle of it. They don't see it the same way that we have now come to understand what it looks like. So taking that clear information of what it looks like and the multi-layer warning signs and assistive information for law enforcement and for healthcare and for schools, what they can look for is so beneficial. And then including their recovery, that mental health and substance, you are giving them a chance to take back their life. And that is priceless. So anyone that is out there that wants to get involved, we are actually looking for volunteers. I need an administrative volunteer really bad. So always taking up some administrative help on this end. But we have a lot of programs that we want to get out. We were all on a go before COVID. We do now. Our support groups are online, like many of the others as well. But we can't get back into the schools yet. Schools are overwhelmed with other stuff. Our kids need to know this information. Social media is a platform for that. But the social media that we use isn't the same social media high schoolers are using. So, you're really talking to the parents and the service providers out there, and you're saying, hey, can you pass this on to your kids and just sit down and have a conversation with them? Because if they're dating, they're developing those relationships. So do we want our kids who come from happy, healthy backgrounds to fall for the cutest guy? There is on gateway.org, there is Emma Story who talks about the cute high school guy that she fell for. It was just a typical crush. And then as he provided her marijuana to get high and took her to a party, well, then it became, well, now you owe me this. And before she knew it, he was taking her to meet up with other men and sometimes a lot of men. But it was all under that guise of, well, I did this for you and now you need to do this for me. And if you want this relationship, this is what you owe me. And I think it's important to keep that education going for our youth so they can develop those better boundaries and protect themselves. That, I believe, is the main key in reducing, because we have adult survivors, we have youth at risk, and then we have parents of previous traumas. So it's kind of like a 3-sector level, and those 3 different sectors have to be different information, age appropriate, and services accordingly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think we're so grateful to have our panelists here to also reiterate the importance of just self-education and how effective that is at the individual level to, call out your own friends if there's incorrect terminology being used, to stress the importance and knowledge of what, signs to look for. All of that is so effective at the individual level as well. So Thank you so much for reiterating that. And Dr. Price, there was also a follow-up in the chat regarding mental health-based either therapies or initiatives to support survivors as well. And they were hoping you could speak a little bit about what sort of mental health initiatives even look like operationally, how their effectiveness is sort of measured, and your experience with that specifically.
Okay, so this is gonna take half an hour. Ready? No, I'm kidding. So this is a vast area, so I'm just going to mention a couple things. One, the victims of trafficking, whether labor or sex, or those who are exploited, who may not meet legal criteria of trafficking according to the U.S. law, nonetheless look more traumatized than the population I used to study, like military, combat veterans, civilian natural disaster victims. So they're really, really traumatized. Okay, so another piece of information I want to give you is our group is discussing to hold a mental health workshop in coming month. Now, COVID-19 kind of threw us off, like, it threw everybody off. And the chief hunter psychiatrist that I work with, her family all got the COVID. So we're kind of, still waiting for it. But they have published the manual for service providers, and even including social service providers, what they do when they encounter potential trafficking victims. And that goes into all the way from knowing the signs and the symptoms and knowing particular treatments that may work for this particular segment of the population because they are likely to have complex PTSD. So stay tuned. We'll provide more information later on that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think further expanding on initiatives can definitely occur during our discussion section as well. And I know not all panelists will be able to join us in person for that, but as many of them mentioned, there are slides, links, everything that will be deep dived into further for that discussion and sent out to all of our participants as well. In the last sort of 10 minutes before we wrap up, I would love to just pose the question to all panelists about what you hope our participants take away from this discussion, whether that's reiterating some initiative-based opportunities and engagement endeavors, or more focused on awareness and education. We have asked it's a big question, so we have given our panelists a bit of a heads up on this one, but we're hoping to sort of conclude with some main takeaways that our participants can bring with them. Perhaps starting with Ms. Wilkins.
Okay. I think the biggest thing to take away, like Ms. McKnight mentioned, it doesn't always look like taken. We have to stop looking for this taken types of situations because we will miss it every single time, which is a disservice to them as well as a disservice to us. I really want us to start having the conversations again, like she said as well. That's the number one thing I always tell parents. We have got to stop shying away from these tough conversations because the kids are going to have them anyway amongst themselves. So why not let us start that conversation? That would be my biggest takeaway. Do your own research. That's all I got.
Ms. Pretorius?
Yeah, what I would love to share, and Jessica, you touched upon it before, with where we are, and because we have come a long way in the fight to combat human trafficking in our country. I mean, 10 years ago, the terminology human trafficking, you would not see that like we do in headlines, and the media is talking about it. And for better, for worse, it is kind of like a trending issue. So what I would welcome for participants and students listening to this is, however you might feel called to get involved, that could look like so many different ways, whether it's interning, volunteering, or bringing your own unique skill set either now or in the future when you enter the professional workforce. With the Sail Away Foundation, I wanted to mention very briefly, we've taken the best practices from working with law enforcement and we're scaling that. So we're using techniques from the for-profit sector. And we say, we want to keep the heart and soul of our mission, but how do we scale that like a Starbucks? So that instead of training the 20,000 or educating 20,000 children a year that we were doing in Chicago every year, how do we take that number to 2 million? And with that in mind, that's when we bring in our technology experts. That's when we bring in the CEO who sold his business for $4 billion to help us scale our model so that we can be reaching students all over the country with our prevention curriculum that we're rolling out through the same model that Franklin Covey did their 7 Habits of Highly Effective People when they did that within the school system, but then also training law enforcement and emergency workers in the ERs. We have our general global strategic operatives who last year 2019 trained 240,000 healthcare workers across 6 of the largest health systems in the country. So whatever your interest, gifting, talent, skill is that you can bring to this issue and fighting, I don't want to use the word fight because what you put energy into, like it increases. So we want to end trafficking and protect those who are being exploited and prevent it from happening in the future. So I would just welcome you to continue the conversation with those in your circle. Jessica, I love what you said, starting with your peer group, educating yourself, knowing what those talking points are, knowing the facts, and joining in the effort to help those who are affected by this issue in whatever way speaks to you.
Absolutely. And that prevention curriculum, Ms. Pretorius, is that launched yet, or will that be later this year?
Yeah, so we are currently looking for schools to pilot our curriculum. It's all train the trainer. It's a hybrid model, K through 12, because we want to educate the whole school system. It's not just the teachers and educators, but also the principals. Also, once kids are fully back in school, the janitorial staff, the lunch ladies, because these kids can be disclosing to someone who they most feel comfortable with, and that might not be a teacher per se.
Absolutely, great. Dr. Price?
Okay. So, at the onset, I said one of my focus for today is to try to disseminate labor trafficking, forced labor, and other forms of human trafficking. And Jessica, thank you for commenting on, types of businesses that are more closely linked to labor trafficking. So with the little time I have left, I brought some books. I don't mean to create the book club, but I am in the school that approaching the human trafficking with ignorance is only going to hurt. So not only self-educate, but educate from the past knowledge. So in terms of a labor trafficking area, one thing that I read, I don't know if you can see it, it's kind of reflecting it. It's called Fishermen Slaves, Human Trafficking, and the Seafood We Eat. And this is a AP Associate Press Pulitzer Prize winning book. And one of the authors is actually the graduate of Washington University. She gave a talk here. And it really tells you we are emptying the marine life in the vast Southeast Asian oceans. And we are a guilty party. Because we want to have a convenience, we want to have those fish cheap. So read that if you, I can post the work and you can get it. The second one, if that book doesn't make you nauseated, then read another book called Blood and Earth. And this was written by Kevin Bales. I don't agree with everything he said. He makes kind of extraordinary statement, but this is a book about mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And where does it link to? Your iPhones, your computers. Those are made by child labor who are digging the dirt to find the little precious minerals and the metals. So in a sense, our greed is contributing the vast amount of forced labor in the world. And if you talk about the globally, about 60 some odd percentage of trafficking or trafficking like victimization is labor trafficking. So I'll also post that in the chat when I'm done with this. Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. Those will also be on the Impact website as well for reference with everyone's links and initiatives mentioned as well. Ms. McKnight, I'd love to have your final thoughts as well for everyone before we wrap up.
Thank you. Yes. I think final thoughts and initiatives. Here in Illinois, there is a new bill, SB 2762, and this has drawn my attention. Ms. Pretorius, this goes along with what you're trying to do in the education spectrum of our kids. The REACH Act currently, right now, sexual abuse education is allowed up until from pre-K to 5th grade. But during the teen years in high school, 7th, 8th high school years, there is no continuing education of that. So the REACH Act allows that to continue and expand on that with age-appropriate material about consent, moral values, reestablishing a sense of self and identity. Someone who's gone through trafficking, that's the first thing that the trafficker has to erase from you. It is your sense of self and sense of identity. You really kind of lose yourself, and your value becomes only of whatever service you can be to others. So making sure that in the education modules that we use, that we are again focusing that we have to change 2,000 plus years of human behavior and beliefs and dispel those old standards of tolerances so that we can really inspire our young people to not only respect themselves, but respect others and understand what consent is and how powerful the word consent is and the equal rights given to both in a relationship. And I think for high schoolers, I like to say, you know, use your buddy skills. You were taught these, everybody was taught these. I know my kids were taught these. Take those buddy skills and advance them. It's very simple. When you're socializing, when you're out with friends, you know, if you want a soda, go get it yourself, open it yourself, hang on to it, don't leave it sit. Don't go off with strangers. Make sure somebody knows where you're going, who you're going to be with. I know teenagers will be teenagers, and yes, we cannot control 24/7 what they do. But we can prevent a lot through conversation, through talking with them, continuing education to involve healthcare, law enforcement, and educators, those who are those key people that survivors will have an opportunity, will usually interact with, because they're going to go to their peers before they're going to go to their parents typically. So I think it's important to really focus on how best can we help them believe that they matter enough and are important enough that they don't deserve this, that somebody is taking advantage of them, and there is help available and they're not in it alone. They can, you know, message, search, Google, whatever it is that they feel they need to do, but talk to someone and know that help is available and that you won't be punished for coming forward. You're not going to get kicked out of the country. You know, even if you don't have documentation, you're not going to get, you can get protected. They have visas to protect you and keep you here and help you. So that risk is reduced. They are doing the best they can to make sure that survivors feel comfortable coming forward and getting help. And I think that involves conversation, changing old norms, And remember that wraparound services for our families right now and everything that they're going through, compounding it with mental health, substance use, alcohol problems, behavioral problems, knowing that all of that in order to keep healthy families being healthy and teaching healthy behaviors overall is so important. So have those resources available. That's what I try to do when people reach out to me is what else can I do for them, and who else can I put them in touch with that's going to be able to help them in this area where they have more expertise at this. So getting safe, being empowered, having life skills, claiming their identity back to rebuild their lives. And of course, have those open conversations because they mean everything.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, there's so much mentioned here that is people can get started on tonight. You know, when as soon as this ends, there's a lot of initiatives at the individual, local, national level, even that have all been mentioned tonight that we're really looking forward to drive a lot of our campus's conversation towards those efforts. So thank you all so much for sharing. Dr. Price, did you have one final comment before we wrap up?
Yes. So I saw Andrea Nichols' name somewhere. I don't know. She may have left. I miss you. In any case, so she has a hour and a half session on sex trafficking in the Midwest. So that's going to be February 19th, and I'll pass the information how you can get in. You have to register, but she used to be my mentor when I was studying up in 2014 and 15, and she's an authority in this area. So I encourage you to join this session. Thank you.
Absolutely.